Hey guys, I'm Ted, here to give you another lecture, and for this lecture we're going to continue rolling with our examination of the Homefront during the United States Civil War. And I'm going to dive right into things right now. During the war, the economy of the United States just steamed straight ahead. The war year was really a boom time for the United States economy. In many ways, it was a remarkable success. It became a juggernaut and an out of proportion juggernaut. The demand for war materials, arms, clothing, food for the 2 million men and animals that were fighting the war for the United States propelled every aspect of the United States economy, every segment of the economy to sell. In agriculture, the United States produced more wheat than ever before. Beef, pork, chicken, corn, fruits, all have remarkable success, and you must account for the fact that about a quarter to a third of all the agricultural laborers had left to join the army. One of the reasons that agriculture was able to be sustained and really to show marked improvements during this time is because of the can be attributed to the new technological innovations. These helped in the department of agriculture. Items or machinery such as reapers and mowers. They really powered the industry. They really allowed agriculture to be sustained, even though there was such a lack of manpower, even though so many agricultural workers were leaving to fight in the war. Canned food. Canned food also became widespread and really essential for feeding the large number of troops on those far and distant battlefields. Transportation. Transportation expanded greatly. The United States continue to lay rail lines and continue to improve upon those rail lines. There was this continual process of rail line expansion and improvement. During the course of the war, the United States military would actually go on to create the world's largest railway right in the heart of the Confederate States. It was over 2,000 miles long, and it was created to shuttle supplies and ferry troops across the Deep South. Canal construction increased, and industrial mechanization sped up dramatically as manufacturers rose to meet the challenge of producing firearms, buttons, and shoes. All of this marked a radical shift of the greatest percentage of national wealth from the southeast towards the northeast. This healthy growth of industry will continue after the war. The absence of the Southern Democrats removed the great roadblock to the internal improvements in industry that many in the free states have wanted. All of the platform points that they championed from the 1860 election were passed by Congress, and all of them had great effect on the commercial life of the United States. They failed to create a new national bank, but they did manage to impose one national currency on the nation, and this currency would enhance and stabilize interstate business transactions. Now, in the United States, it wasn't yet the economic sector that was booming. The political sector was booming as well. The Homestead Act of 1862 gave 162 acres of land to anyone who would live on it for 5 years, and over 80 million acres of land were eventually parceled out under this act. A great part of settling the West was spearheaded by the use of the Homestead Act. The Morrill Land Grant Act. The Morrill Land Grant Act just gave each state access to federal land to establish agricultural and mechanical colleges. Those A&M schools. Those A&M schools can be traced in most cases directly to the Morrill Land Grant Act, but not just those schools. Though the colleges and institutions of higher learning that can be traced back to the Morrill Land Grant Act were actually a part, or are actually a part of the single most important education-centered piece of legislature passed in the United States history. Many of the great universities and colleges in the United States were created via the Morrill Act. Universities like Rutgers, Purdue, Clemson, and Cornell can all be traced back to the Morrill Land-Grant Act. The Pacific Railroad Act of 1862 laid the foundation for the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. Government grants were given every mile for every mile of track that was laid. Government grants were given. It was something along the line of $16,000 and I want to say $16,000 and 6,400 acres of land for every mile of track. The Union Pacific, the Northern Pacific, and of course the Central Pacific rail lines were all created from this act, and eventually more than 120 million acres of land was given away via this act. All of the further ascension of all of these acts, the Rail Act, the Homestead Act, the Morrill Land Grant Act, they all went hand in hand in furthering the United States to become a great industrial power. A strong national currency, as I alluded to earlier, that was accepted in the different regions, federal aid for the construction of rail lines, developing the Western Territories, settling the Western Territories, sponsoring the creation of colleges to better educate the nation, engineers and mechanics, and of course free land for farmers. All of these things have been key points of the 1860 presidential platform for the Republican Party. All of these have been key things that spurred Lincoln to win the North, to win the northern free states, and also the western free states. All of these pushed the United States towards great power status. You have to remember that at this time, the United States is a middling power. It is not a great power in the 19th century. The United States is a middling power. The United States seemed unstoppable in the eyes of many. There was great anticipation because the United States was fully prosecuting a massive war while embarking on a grand domestic platform, and was really economically powering itself through the war. There was a great anticipation, a great expectation that the United States would be successful after the war, that good things were going to come the nation's way. And of course, continuing with our examination of the home front, you cannot ever really give a discussion on the United States Civil War without discussing African Americans. And really, needless to say, but the African American community experienced the most profound changes between the years 1860 and 1865. Now, going into the war in 1861, the vast majority of the United States placed saving the Republic above liberating the slave population for sure. For many, it was not even a consideration. It was just a war for the Republic. It was essentially they were essentially going to war to keep the national mission and the nation as a whole alive. The democratic experiment could not be allowed to be torn asunder by rebels, was the opinion of many. As stated previously, the Democratic Party was especially opposed to liberating slaves, and the United States government itself initially did not even associate the war with ending slavery. The Democrats, they were especially vocal about this, about not associating the war with slavery. Now, many Republicans were also in this boat as well, and Lincoln more prominently. He was initially only concerned with saving the Republic, not freeing the slaves. There were people in the United States who wanted and expected the war to be revolutionary in that it would bring about the radical reorientation of the rebel South and the Republic as a whole. That revolutionary act, of course, being the liberation of the slaves. The abolitionists and the radical Republicans held this view from the onset of the war. This was their moment in their eyes. Now you have to remember that in the early years of the war, there were very powerful impediments to freeing the slaves, to making any sort of move against slavery. The Democratic Party was still violently opposed to emancipation. Lincoln still needed to marshal all of the United States resources. Lincoln and his advisors could not afford to alienate anyone. To illustrate just one of the impediments and blocks to emancipation, George McClellan intentionally did not press Confederate forces, the Army of Northern Virginia, because he did not want to inflict a severe defeat on the rebel states. He only wanted to beat them bad enough to make them return to the Republic on equal footing, like they had never left. If the states were beaten too severely, they might not have the ability to bargain, to barter at an armistice table. They may have conditions forced upon them, like abolishing slavery. Another, and to many surprising impediment, would be William Sherman. Sherman was the man who really liked Southern life. He liked the slave states and so forth. He was also not very fond of African Americans. He would serve as the first president of Louisiana State University. He was not in favor of emancipating the slaves. He wrote early on in the war, "I would prefer to have this a white man's war. With my opinions of Negroes and experiences, gay prejudice, I cannot trust them yet." Lincoln is having to work with two of his most prominent Democratic commanders openly flaunting their disdain for emancipation and his desire to prosecute the war to bring it to a swift end. And it's really surprising with Sherman, because Sherman is the guy that a lot of people in the African American community still look to. And Sherman was the commander on hand. He was the big name commander on hand in the Deep South, in the areas where there was this heavy black population. Sherman came up and they flocked to him. Even now, people still speak of William Tecumseh Sherman fondly, not just because he brought freedom their way, but because he was vigorously punishing the South. He was the March to the Sea that we'll get to later. Really punished the South, really hurt them. In the eyes of the slaves who were being liberated by Sherman, this was the will of God. This was the work of God. God sent somebody. God sent them their worst nightmare. God sent a man who was bringing them what John Brown had attempted to bring them. This is a guy who was coming to take the slaves away from them and destroy their capacity to survive. Destroying farms, destroying railroads, destroying all the infrastructure. So Sherman has a lot of support from people who take very negative, who have a very negative view against the Confederacy. He's often referred to as Moses, believe it or not. Many people look to many people at the time, many of the contraband slaves and the leaders of the African American community in the Deep South looked to him as Moses, leading the people away from bondage, and they followed him. And we'll get to how Sherman got, because he wasn't overly fond of African Americans. We'll look at how Sherman got them to leave his camp alone in our next lecture. And with that being said, we'll break here and we'll come back for another lecture. As always, I'm Ted. Hit like, subscribe, and comment. Let me know what you guys thought about this lesson. Particularly, let me know what you guys think about Sherman. Hit like, subscribe, and comment. I'll see you guys next time.